In the Almeida mansion, where luxury disguised dark secrets, Sophia, the daughter-in-law, was the personification of virtue. Her smiles were as flawless as the jewels adorning her neck, and her devotion to her father-in-law, the patriarch Elias, was praised by all. But behind the silken mask, Sophia wove a web of silent cruelty. Elias, once a sharp-minded man, now wandered the corridors of his own home, his memory clouded, confusion a constant fog. His medication, essential for his lucidity, mysteriously disappeared, and each day a pen was pushed into his trembling hand, over donation papers that would seal the fate of his fortune. No one saw the malice except Edgar. The crow, with feathers the color of night and eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages, watched from high in the library, a Gothic guardian of truth. He did not caw vain warnings, he acted, and his first move was subtle, yet devastating. Sophia's reading glasses, essential for her charade, vanished, carried away by Edgar's dark talons to a hiding place only he knew. The game of family ambition had begun, and the crow of truth was ready to unearth every lie. The silence of the Almeida mansion, once a veil of false peace, was shattered by the sharp sound of a stifled scream. Sophia, the personification of calculated elegance, now had wide eyes, her frantic hands fumbling across the mahogany table, the marble floor, every surface around her. Her glasses, essential for the charade she orchestrated, had vanished. That trivial accessory was, for her, the key to control, the tool that allowed her to read the fine print of the donation documents and, more importantly, to conceal the coldness in her eyes. Without them, her vision was a blur, and her patience a thread about to snap. "Where are they? Where the hell are my glasses?" she hissed, her voice a poisonous whisper that barely disguised her rising fury. The mask of virtue slipped, revealing the ruthless woman beneath it. Elias, seated in the opposite armchair, seemed even more lost in the fog of his mind, his cloudy eyes fixed on a distant point. The absence of his medication was, with each passing minute, a tide dragging him further from reality, making him an easy prey. Sophia needed his signature, and she needed it now, before any glimmer of lucidity, or worse, of resistance could emerge. She tried to proceed, forcing her eyes to focus on the printed lines, but the words danced, illegible. Elias's trembling handwriting, which she so coveted at the bottom of those papers, was a ghost she could not conjure without the clarity of her vision. The urgency was palpable. Every second without her glasses was a risk, an opportunity for fate to intervene. She could not afford to wait. The Almeida fortune was within her grasp, and a pair of lenses would not stop her. As Sophia hunched over the documents, squinting and muttering expletives, a soft sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor. Ricardo, Elias's son, had just arrived, his day's routine interrupted by an uneasy feeling. He wasn't blind to his father's deterioration, nor to Sophia's constant presence, but his mind, occupied with family business, rarely delved into the nuances of what he saw. Until now. Sophia's agitation was unusual. Her voice, normally so mellifluous, was laced with a harshness Ricardo had never witnessed before. "Sophia, is everything all right? Did something happen?" Ricardo asked, his voice laden with genuine concern that contrasted with the tension in the air. Sophia straightened abruptly, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Ricardo, darling, so glad you're here. Just a minor setback. My glasses have gone missing, and I was trying to help your father with some important documents." She gestured vaguely at the papers, trying to appear casual, but the tip of her finger trembled. Ricardo frowned. "Documents? Father, are you all right? You seem a little tired." He approached Elias, who merely babbled something unintelligible, his eyes fixed on emptiness. Ricardo's heart tightened. His father was worsening, and the speed of his deterioration was alarming. From atop the bookshelf, Edgar the Crow watched. His black eyes, more penetrating than any lens, registered every movement, every tremor, every lie. He had completed his first mission, disarming the villain. Now it was time to guide the hero. With a low caw, almost a whisper, he took flight, not far, but to a strategic spot in the library, near an old oak desk Elias rarely used. Ricardo, distracted by concern for his father, noticed the crow. Edgar was no ordinary bird. His intelligence was legendary in the family. The crow landed on the desk and, with a quick, deliberate movement, nudged a small object hidden beneath a pile of old papers. It was a medicine bottle, one of many Elias was supposed to take daily. The bottle rolled, clattering to the floor. The sound, though subtle, was enough to break Ricardo's concentration. He bent down to pick up the bottle, and his eyes fixed on the label. It was his father's medication, the one he was supposed to take religiously. But the bottle was empty, and it wasn't the only one. Beside it, there were others also empty, and some still full, but with expired dates or clearly altered dosages. A chilling sensation ran down Ricardo's spine. Those medicines shouldn't have been there, hidden under old papers, much less empty or tampered with. Sophia, noticing Ricardo's sudden silence and his fixed gaze on the floor, felt a chill. "What is that, Ricardo? Just some of your father's old things," she began, her voice attempting to regain its sweetness, but failing miserably. Ricardo didn't answer. He knelt, examining the bottles, his mind racing, his father's confusion, Sophia's agitation, the hidden medicines. A disturbing image began to form in his mind. The crow, Edgar, cawed again, a sound that now seemed like a warning, a summons. He flew to a darker corner of the desk, where a small drawer was slightly ajar. Edgar's gaze was unmistakable, fixed on the drawer as if he wanted Ricardo to open it. The tension in the room was almost unbearable, a prelude to the truth about to be unearthed. The silence in the library became a heavy, almost suffocating entity. Ricardo, kneeling on the marble floor, felt the cold stone penetrate his knees. But it was a cold that couldn't compare to the ice beginning to form in his chest. The empty bottles, the altered labels, the absence of vital medication for his father. Everything fit into a macabre puzzle. Sophia's voice, once mellifluous, now seemed a distant buzz, a desperate attempt to drown out the truth revealing itself. His eyes, still fixed on the bottles, were suddenly drawn to the crow. Edgar, the winged guardian, was no mere spectator. He was the maestro of a revelation, and his black eyes, sharper than any scalpel, were fixed on the small, slightly open drawer of the old oak desk. It was an invitation, a silent command. Ricardo stood, his mind in a turmoil, and walked towards the desk. Each step was heavy, laden with a dark premonition. Sophia, noticing the direction of his gaze, stepped forward, her voice now a thread of poorly disguised panic. "Ricardo, there's nothing there. Just old papers, unimportant. Your father keeps a lot of old junk, you know how he is." Distracted. The word distracted sounded like a sharp knife in the air, cutting through Sophia's false facade. Ricardo didn't answer. His fingers brushed the aged wood of the drawer. The crow cawed again, a low but insistent sound, like a reminder that time was of the essence. With a gentle pull, the drawer opened. What Ricardo found there was not harmless old junk. There were more medicine bottles, but this time they were full. Sealed bottles, with the correct dosages, perfect expiration dates. These were the medications Elias should have been taking, the ones that had mysteriously disappeared, but that wasn't all. Beneath the bottles, carefully hidden, was a stack of papers. They weren't just any papers, they were documents. Ricardo picked them up, his hands trembling. The first was a will, Elias Almeida's original will. His father's firm, unmistakable handwriting, dated years earlier, designated Ricardo as the sole heir and administrator of the family fortune. Beside it, there were other documents, contracts, powers of attorney, all original, all bearing Elias's signature, but with dates preceding the deterioration of his health. These were the documents Sophia was trying to replace, the ones she wanted Elias to sign now, in his confused state. The revelation hit Ricardo like a lightning bolt. It wasn't just negligence, it wasn't just carelessness. It was a meticulous, cruel plan, orchestrated to steal his father's fortune, taking advantage of his vulnerability. The fog that enveloped Elias's mind was not accidental. It was a weapon in Sophia's hands. "No, it can't be." Ricardo's voice was a hoarse whisper, barely audible. He raised his eyes to Sophia, and her mask finally shattered. Panic was evident in her eyes, pallor on her face, the way her hands clenched into fists. "Ricardo, I can explain. It's not what you think. They're just... I was keeping them for him, so he wouldn't lose them. He's so forgetful, you know." Sophia stammered, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. She tried to approach, hands outstretched, as if to snatch the papers from Ricardo's grasp. But Ricardo recoiled, the documents clutched to his chest. The truth was undeniable, brutal. He looked at his father, still seated in the armchair, oblivious to the storm brewing around him, and a wave of rage and despair swept over him. His father, a man who had built an empire, was being stripped of everything, his dignity, his fortune, his very mind, by the one who had sworn to care for him. "Explain what, Sophia?" Ricardo's voice was cold, cutting, devoid of any affection. "Explain why my father's medicine was hidden here, while he deteriorated day after day. Explain why you were trying to make him sign new donation documents, while the originals which protected him were kept as if they were dirty secrets." Sophia recoiled, her eyes searching for an escape, an excuse, anything, but there was nowhere to run. The crow from atop the bookshelf cawed again, a sound that seemed like a final verdict, a condemnation. He had fulfilled his mission. The truth lay exposed, naked and cruel, under the relentless light of the library. The Almeida mansion, once a sanctuary of luxury and false peace, was now a stage for the revelation of betrayal. Ricardo, with the original documents in his hands and the image of the hidden medicines etched in his mind, felt the weight of immense responsibility. He had to act, and he had to act fast, before Sophia could cause more harm, before his father's fortune was irremediably lost. The tables had turned, and the crow of truth had given Ricardo the tools to fight. The battle for Elias Almeida's mind and legacy was just beginning. What Ricardo found there was not harmless old junk. There were more medicine bottles, but this time they were full, sealed bottles with the correct dosages, perfect expiration dates. These were the medications Elias should have been taking, the ones that had mysteriously disappeared. But that wasn't all. Beneath the bottles, carefully hidden, was a stack of papers. They weren't just any papers. They were documents. Ricardo picked them up, his hands trembling. The first was a will, Elias Almeida's original will. His father's firm, unmistakable handwriting, dated years earlier, designated Ricardo as the sole heir and administrator of the family fortune. Beside it, there were other documents, contracts, powers of attorney, all original, all bearing Elias's signature, but with dates preceding the deterioration of his health. These were the documents Sophia was trying to replace, the ones she wanted Elias to sign now, in his confused state. Still stunned, Sophia attempted one last, desperate move. Her eyes, without her glasses, could barely focus on the papers in Ricardo's hands. But she knew what they represented, the end of her plan, the collapse of her ambition. With a shrill cry, she lunged forward, not to argue, but to snatch the documents. "Give me that, Ricardo! You don't understand! You're naive! Your father doesn't know what he's doing!" Ricardo, however, was prepared. The icy rage had transformed into cutting clarity. He dodged Sophia's attack, turning his body and protecting the papers. His eyes, once full of confusion and concern, now gleamed with relentless determination. He was no longer the distracted son, but the guardian of his father and his legacy. "I understand perfectly, Sophia. I understand that you are a criminal, and that my father is in danger because of you." He took a step back, maintaining a safe distance. Sophia's voice, once hysterical, was now a lament, a mix of fury and despair. She knew she was cornered. The absence of her glasses, stolen by Edgar, left her even more vulnerable, her movements clumsy, her vision blurred, as if the world conspired against her. She tried one last gambit, her eyes sweeping the room in search of an exit, a distraction. "You can't prove anything. It's the word of a sick old man against mine, and these papers, who's to say you didn't forge them?" The accusation, though ridiculous, showed the extent of her desperation. Ricardo merely shook his head. "It's not the word of a sick old man, Sophia. It's the truth. And the truth, unlike your lies, has witnesses. Edgar, for example." He gestured to the crow, who watched from above, a silent symbol of approaching justice. "And I have the originals, and the medicine you hid. That is more than enough." He pulled his phone from his pocket, his fingers agile and firm. "The police and a specialized doctor will be here shortly. My father needs urgent care, and you need to answer for your crimes." Sophia, hearing the word police, paled even further. Her knees buckled slightly, and she stumbled backward, bumping into a bookshelf. The sound of falling books echoed in the library, breaking the tense silence. She had nowhere left to run, nothing left to say. Her plan, so meticulously orchestrated, crumbled before her eyes, undone by the cunning of a crow and the determination of a son. Ricardo didn't avert his gaze from her. The pain of betrayal was deep, but the need to protect his father was even greater. He approached Elias, who was still in the armchair, his eyes fixed on emptiness, oblivious to the storm that had descended upon his home. Ricardo knelt beside him, holding his aged hand. "Father, I'm here. Everything will be all right, I promise." From above, Edgar let out a soft caw, almost a murmur of approval. The first phase of the battle was won. The truth had been revealed. But the fight to restore Elias's health and ensure justice was just beginning. The Almeida mansion, once a sanctuary of secrets, now braced itself for the arrival of law and order, and for the start of a new and painful chapter. The Almeida mansion, once a sanctuary of secrets, now braced itself for the arrival of law and order, and for the start of a new and painful chapter. The tense silence of the library was suddenly torn by the distant sound of sirens, a sharp wail that grew in intensity, approaching, shattering the false peace Sophia had so painstakingly tried to maintain. Ricardo felt a mix of relief and apprehension. Justice was on its way, but with it would come the public exposure of intimate pain, the disgrace of his family. Sophia, stumbling, clutched at the bookshelf, her unfocused eyes sweeping the room as if searching for a hole to hide in. The sound of the sirens was the soundtrack to her failure, the melody of her condemnation. She let out a groan, a hoarse, animalistic sound, as the flashing lights of a police car and an ambulance flickered through the library windows, painting the luxurious room with intermittent blue and red lights. Within minutes, the mansion's main door burst open. Firm voices and hurried footsteps echoed through the marble hall. 2 uniformed police officers, followed by a team of paramedics, stormed into the library. The air, previously heavy with tension, was now charged with professional urgency. "Good evening. We're from the police. We received a report of elder abuse and attempted fraud," said the elder officer, his serious gaze sweeping over Ricardo, Sophia, and finally Elias, still seated in the armchair, oblivious to everything. Ricardo stood, the original documents and medicine bottles held firmly in his hands. His voice, though still choked with emotion, was clear and firm. I made the report. My daughter-in-law, Sophia, was drugging my father and trying to make him sign property donation documents while hiding his vital medication. Sophia, hearing the direct accusation, tried to react. That's absurd. He's lying. My father-in-law is a confused man, and Ricardo has always been unstable. Her voice, however, was a thread of panic, and the lack of her glasses prevented her from clearly seeing the officers' faces, increasing her desperation. She seemed like a cornered beast, her movements clumsy and aimless. The paramedics, wasting no time, approached Elias. One of them, a calm and efficient woman, began to examine the Almeida patriarch. She checked his vital signs, asked Ricardo questions about his medication and medical history. The scene was painful to watch. Elias, a man of such strength and presence, now so frail and vulnerable, being treated as an emergency patient in his own home. Ricardo handed the full sealed medicine bottles to the paramedic. These are the medicines he should have been taking. They were found hidden. The ones he was taking were tampered with, empty, or had false labels. The paramedic examined the bottles carefully, then looked at Elias with an expression of concern. We need to take him to the hospital immediately. He is in a state of severe mental confusion and dehydration. The lack of medication may have caused serious damage. As Elias was carefully prepared for transport, the police turned to Sophia. Madam Sophia, we need you to accompany us to the station for questioning. The accusations are serious. Sophia tried to resist, her eyes wide with horror. No, I'm not going anywhere. I'm his wife. I take care of him. You can't do this. She tried to pull away, but one of the officers gently held her arm, his firmness unquestionable. Ricardo, with the original documents still in hand, handed them to the elder officer. Here are my father's original documents, including the will that names me as heir. And here are the donation papers Sophia was trying to make him sign, which are clearly fraudulent, considering his state of health. The officer examined the papers, his expression hardening with each sheet. This is substantial evidence. Mr. Almeida, we appreciate your cooperation. Madam Sophia will be detained for investigation. As Sophia was escorted out of the library, her screams and protests echoing through the mansion's corridors, Ricardo watched his father being wheeled away on a stretcher. Elias, his eyes still distant, didn't seem to register the gravity of the situation. Ricardo's heart tightened. The battle for the fortune had been won, but the fight to restore his father's health and dignity was just beginning. From atop the bookshelf, Edgar, the family crow, observed the scene with his dark, penetrating eyes. He let out a low caw, almost a sigh. His mission was accomplished. The truth had been revealed. Justice was in motion. But the Almeida mansion, now empty of Sophia's chaos and presence, seemed to carry the weight of all secrets unveiled, of all betrayals exposed. The luxury and opulence now seemed a cold backdrop for the pain and uncertainty that settled in. Ricardo knew the path ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time in a long time, he felt he was in control, guided by truth and the promise to protect his father. The sound of sirens faded into the distance, taking with it not only Sophia, but also the feverish urgency that had dominated the Almeida mansion. Ricardo watched the ambulance pull away, its lights flashing like a final goodbye to the night of chaos. A strange emptiness settled in, heavy and silent, filled only by the echo of the officers' footsteps as they concluded the scene and by Ricardo's ragged breath. The victory, if it could be called that, tasted bitter. His father, Elias, was on his way to the hospital, his mind clouded and his body weakened, a victim of a betrayal he could never have imagined. Ricardo felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. The adrenaline began to subside, giving way to deep exhaustion and a searing pain. He still held the original documents, his father's will, and the fraudulent donation papers, as if they were anchors in the storm. The truth had come to light, but the revelation had torn the fabric of his family, exposing wounds that would take time, perhaps a lifetime, to heal. He needed to go to the hospital. He needed to be by his father's side. But first, one last look at Edgar, who still watched him from atop the bookshelf, a silent guardian. The crow let out a low caw, almost a summons, and Ricardo felt a strange comfort. That animal, so despised by Sophia, had been the catalyst for truth, the unlikely hero of a story of greed and redemption. The drive to the hospital was a blur. The city streets seemed to spin, car headlights merging into a whirlwind of lights. Ricardo's mind was in a loop, reliving every moment of the night, his father's confusion, Sophia's fury, the intelligent gleam in Edgar's eyes. Upon arrival, the antiseptic smell of the hospital enveloped him, a cold reminder of reality. At the reception, the nurse directed him to the waiting room. "Doctor, Mendez is with your father. He'll come speak with you as soon as we have a clearer picture." The words were professional, but the concern in her eyes was palpable. Ricardo sat, sinking into a cold plastic chair, and waited. Each minute felt like an hour, each second an eternity. The image of Elias, so strong and imposing in his memory, contrasted painfully with the fragility he had witnessed. His father, the man who built an empire, who taught him about honesty and hard work, was now at the mercy of his own mind and Sophia's criminal negligence. Guilt gnawed at him. How had he not noticed sooner? How had he allowed the situation to reach this point? Hours dragged on. The sun began to peek over the horizon, tinting the sky a pale grey. Finally, the waiting room door opened, and Dr. Mendez, a middle-aged man with tired but kind eyes, entered. "Mr. Almeida." Ricardo jumped to his feet, his heart pounding erratically. "Yes, that's me. How is my father?" The doctor sighed, adjusting his glasses. "Your father, Elias, is stable, but his condition is delicate. He suffered a prolonged period of deprivation of his Alzheimer's medication, which significantly worsened his condition. Additionally, there are signs of dehydration and mild malnutrition. His mental confusion is severe. It's difficult to say at this moment if there will be a complete recovery of his cognitive functions, or to what extent. We will need time, proper medication, and a lot of physical therapy and stimulation." The doctor's words fell upon Ricardo like stones. Complete recovery. The uncertainty was a harder blow than any accusation. The battle for the fortune had been won, but the war for his father's mind was far from over, and the chances of victory seemed grim. "And the tampered medication?" Ricardo asked, his voice hoarse. "We analyzed the bottles you brought. The labels were false, and the contents were ineffective or diluted. This constitutes a serious crime. Mr. Almeida, the police are already aware and will take your formal statement." Ricardo merely nodded, his gaze fixed on emptiness. The reality of Sophia's situation also asserted itself. She would be held accountable, and justice, slow or swift, would take its course, but that wouldn't bring his father's mind back. "Can we see him?" Ricardo asked, his voice almost a whisper. "For a few minutes. He's sedated to rest, but it's important for him to feel your presence. The nursing staff will take you." As he walked through the cold hospital corridors, Ricardo felt the weight of responsibility intensify. He was no longer just the son, but the guardian, the protector. The Almeida mansion, once a symbol of power and stability, was now a stage for human fragility and cruelty. Upon entering the room, Elias lay in bed, pale, with an intravenous drip in his arm. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow. Ricardo held his father's aged hand, feeling the thin, cold skin. "Father, I'm here. Everything will be all right. I promise." Outside, the sun finally broke through the clouds, casting a golden light over the city. A new day had arrived, but for Ricardo and Elias, the dawn brought with it the promise of an arduous and uncertain journey. The Almeida mansion, now empty of Sofia's presence, awaited the return of its patriarch, but it was known that he would not be the same. The fight to rebuild what had been broken was just beginning, and Ricardo was ready to face every challenge, guided by truth and unconditional love for his father. Dr. Mendes's words echoed in my mind like a verdict, heavier than any sentence Sofia could receive. Complete recovery. It's hard to say. The uncertainty was a harder blow than anger, more paralyzing than pain. I had fought to expose the truth, to save my father from a woman's greed, but now I faced a more insidious enemy, lost time, irreversible damage. As I held Elias's cold hand, promising to fight for him, I knew that the recently won battle was merely the prologue to a much larger war. The minutes in the hospital room were a whirlwind of emotions. My father's fragility, the guilt that gnawed at me for not having acted sooner, and the iron determination that from that moment on he would receive all the attention, all the care he deserved. The nursing staff, with their silent efficiency, began to administer the correct medications to hydrate him, to nourish his exhausted body. I watched every movement, every needle, every drop of saline, as if I could, with the strength of my gaze, reverse the damage. When the sun finally rose, painting the sky a pale gold, I found myself back in the waiting room, but this time not alone. Two detectives, with serious expressions and notebooks in hand, awaited my formal statement. The story of Edgar, the stolen glasses, the hidden documents, and the tampered medicine seemed almost surreal, told in the cold morning light. But the evidence, the fake medicine bottles, and the fraudulent donation papers were too concrete to be ignored. I handed over my father's original will documents, which named me as heir, and the donation papers Sofia had tried to force him to sign. The detectives examined everything carefully, their expressions hardening with each sheet. "The accusations against Madame Sofia are serious, Mr. Almeida," one of them said, his voice grave. "Attempted fraud, false imprisonment, negligence, and potentially attempted murder. Considering the tampering with medication, she will be held in custody as the investigation proceeds." I merely nodded, my mind torn between the relief of seeing her held accountable and the bitterness of knowing it wouldn't bring my father back to who he was. Justice, I knew, was a slow and impersonal process, incapable of healing the deepest wounds. Leaving the hospital was a plunge into reality. The world outside continued its frantic pace, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded in the Almeida mansion and now played out in the hospital corridors. I drove back home, the silence of the car heavier than the sound of the previous night's sirens. The mansion, once a vibrant, lively home, now seemed like a mausoleum, an empty stage where tragedy had been enacted. Upon entering, the air was still, laden with the residual scent of disinfectant and the echo of Sofia's screams. Each room seemed to hold a memory, a ghost of what had happened. The library, especially, with the bookshelf still slightly disarranged from where Edgar had orchestrated his small revolution, seemed like a sanctuary. And there he was, Edgar, perched high on the shelf, watching me with his dark, intelligent eyes. He let out a low caw, almost a greeting, and I felt a strange comfort in his presence. That crow, the unlikely hero, the guardian of truth, was now the only living being in the house who shared the weight of what we had lived through. "You did a good job, Edgar," I whispered, and he tilted his head, as if understanding. I knew he wasn't just a pet. He was part of the family, a silent observer who had refused to be complicit in the darkness. His loyalty, his cunning, had been the key to unraveling Sophia's plot. The days that followed were a blur of hospital visits, meetings with lawyers, and attempts to put the house in order. Elias remained in the hospital, receiving intensive treatment. Dr. Mendes's news was cautiously optimistic. There were small signs of physical improvement, but the mental confusion persisted. Each day, I spoke with him, told him stories, read his favorite books, hoping to spark some flicker of recognition in his distant eyes. I knew the recovery would be long, uncertain, and would require a patience I didn't know I possessed. Meanwhile, the Almeida mansion waited. I began to organize the documents, deal with the finances, prepare everything for my father's return. The fortune, which once seemed central to everything, was now just a detail, a resource to ensure Elias's well-being. The true wealth, I realized, lay in my father's dignity and health, and I would do anything to restore them. The fight to rebuild what had been broken was just beginning, and I was ready to face every challenge, guided by truth and unconditional love for my father. The silence of the mansion was a constant reminder of what had been lost, but also a promise of what could be rebuilt. The days that followed were a tangle of painful routines and fragile hopes. The silence of the Almeida mansion, once just a detail, became a character, a constant reminder of absence and fragility. I divided my time between the hospital, where my father's life hung by an invisible thread, and the house, which I tried, with all my strength, to prepare for a return that seemed increasingly distant. At the hospital, each visit was a test of my resilience. Elias remained in a state of fluctuating confusion. There were moments of faint lucidity, a flicker of recognition in his eyes, a weak squeeze of my hand that filled me with fleeting joy. But most of the time, he was lost, his eyes wandering unfocused, his words disjointed, a distant echo of the man I knew. Dr. Mendes, with his infinite patience, explained the slow progress, the therapies, the new medications. "He's responding physically, Mr. Almeida. Vital signs are good, nutrition is improving, but the cognitive part, it's a long and unpredictable road. We need time, a lot of stimulation, and above all, your presence." My presence. I clung to it like a castaway to a piece of driftwood. I read to him, told him the news of the world, described the changes in the mansion, hoping that some word, some tone of voice, could pierce the barrier that separated him from us. With each weak handshake, each deeper sigh, I felt a pang of relief and renewed determination. Guilt, however, was a constant shadow, a burden I carried with every visit, every sleepless night. I should have noticed, I should have acted sooner. This guilt was a heavy burden, but also a driving force, a silent promise that I would do everything in my power to reverse the damage. As my father's life hung by a thread, the legal battle against Sophia intensified, dragging me into a whirlwind of bureaucracy and accusations. Her lawyers, with an audacity bordering on shamelessness, launched a brutal counter-offensive. They weren't content with trying to discredit my testimony or claim Elias was senile. They went further, attempting to reverse the narrative, painting me as an opportunistic son who waited for his father's fragility to seize control of the family fortune. They alleged that Elias had suffered from advanced dementia for years, and that the original will, which named me as heir, was the result of my manipulation, taking advantage of his supposed incapacity. It was a direct attack on my father's honor and my own integrity. The prosecution, though confident with the evidence of the tampered medicine and fraudulent documents, had to work hard to refute each new allegation. The preliminary hearings were a spectacle of cynicism. Sophia, with her cold, calculating expression, watched everything from the defendant's chair, as if she were an innocent victim of a grand conspiracy. Her lawyers tried to sow doubt, question the validity of the recording I had made, suggest that Edgar, the crow, was merely an animal and that his help was a fantasy of a man under stress. With each new legal maneuver, I felt exhaustion consume me, but anger, a cold and controlled anger, propelled me forward. I would not allow my father's memory to be stained, nor his dignity to be stolen by this woman. The fortune, which was once a symbol of power and success, was now merely the battlefield where truth and justice fought against greed and lies. In the mansion, Edgar was my only confidant. He watched me with his dark, penetrating eyes, as if understanding the complexity of the situation. I spoke with him, vented about the injustices, about the slowness of justice, about the pain of seeing my father in that state. He responded with soft caws, a sound that somehow brought me a strange comfort. His presence was a constant reminder that truth, however hidden, would always find a way to light. I continued to organize the house for Elias's return. In each room, I imagined his reaction, his joy at seeing his books in order, his favorite objects in their places. I hired a specialized nursing team, physical therapists, occupational therapists. The mansion was being adapted, every detail considered for his comfort and safety. It was therapeutic work, a way to channel my anxiety and my hope. The Almeida fortune, which was once the center of attention, was now merely a resource, a means to ensure the best treatment and quality of life for my father. The company which he had built with such meticulous care was being restructured. I immersed myself in the business, trying to keep my father's legacy intact while fighting to protect him from Sophia. Night after night, I sat in the library, the scent of old books and polished wood enveloping me. I leafed through family albums, reliving memories of a time when life was simpler, before the shadow of greed fell upon us. The loneliness was immense, a constant weight in my chest, but my determination was unshakable. I had underestimated Sophia's cruelty, but I would not underestimate the power of love, the resilience of family, the capacity to fight for those we love. Elias's recovery would be long, uncertain, and the legal battle exhausting. But I was ready. Each day was a new challenge, a new opportunity to fight for my father, to restore his dignity and peace. The mansion's silence was no longer just an echo of absence. It was the sound of waiting, of preparation, of the silent promise that, against all odds, life would bloom there again and justice finally would prevail. The tension, however, reached a new peak when Sophia's lawyers secured an injunction. Alleging Elias's supposed prolonged incapacity and reasonable doubt about the validity of the original will, they obtained a court order to freeze a significant portion of the Almeida family assets until the situation was fully clarified. The decision, though temporary, was a harsh blow. It meant that funds earmarked for my father's cutting-edge treatment, while not completely blocked, would now be subjected to even greater scrutiny, with each expense requiring judicial approval. It was a tactic to wear me down, to force me to yield, to divert resources to the legal battle instead of Elias's recovery. Rage simmered within me, but I knew I needed to remain calm. My lawyers were indignant, but assured me they would fight the injunction with all their might. "It's a desperate maneuver, Mr. Almeida," Dr. Ribeiro said, "but it shows they're feeling the pressure. We won't give in." That night, back at the hospital, I watched my father sleeping. His breathing was soft, but his face still bore the marks of confusion. The injunction weighed heavily on me, a dark cloud over an already uncertain journey. I leaned in, holding his hand. "No matter what they do, Father," I whispered, "I won't give up. I will fight for you, for your memory, for everything you built." At that moment, his eyes slowly opened. He looked at me, and for an instant a flash of lucidity pierced the fog. The book. "Mothers," he murmured, his voice weak, almost inaudible. The phrase faded into a sigh and his eyes closed again, the fog returning. Mother's book. The phrase resonated in my mind. My mother had passed away years ago, and her dearest belongings were kept in a box in the attic, or perhaps in the library. I had never paid much attention to them, immersed in family business. But now, my father's mention, so rare and specific, ignited a new flame of hope. Was it mere delirium, or was there something there, something he wanted me to find, something that could help unmask Sophia once and for all? Or perhaps just a link to his own history, a fragment of his memory he was trying to hand to me? The library. I would go back there with Edgar and search. That small flicker of clarity, the mention of Mother's book, was a new thread in the tapestry of my quest, a new direction for my tireless fight. The night promised to be long. My father's phrase echoed in my mind, a fragile and urgent mantra. The book, Mother's. It was an almost inaudible whisper, but to me it resonated like a scream in the oppressive silence of the hospital room. That flicker of lucidity, as fleeting as lightning in a dark storm, ignited a new flame in my chest. I left the hospital with my head buzzing, the image of Sophia and her lawyers, with their cruel injunction, still fresh in my memory. With each step, I felt the weight of responsibility, the urgency to act. The mansion, when I arrived, seemed even darker, a sleeping giant under the night. The library lights, which I had left on, invited me in to plunge into the search. Edgar was there, as always, perched high on a bookshelf, his black eyes fixed on me. He cawed softly, a sound that somehow seemed like a greeting, a recognition of the new mission. Mother's book, Edgar, I said, more to myself than to him. We need to find it. The library was a sanctuary of memories, a labyrinth of stories and knowledge. The dark wooden shelves stretched to the ceiling, filled with volumes of all sizes and ages. The scent of aged paper and leather enveloped me, a familiar fragrance that, for a moment, brought me a bittersweet comfort. I began the search systematically, shelf by shelf, section by section. My mother, a woman of refined tastes, had her own collection, but it mingled with my father's vast library. I looked for something that stood out, something she would have cherished specially. A diary, perhaps? A poetry book with personal notes? My fingers slid over leather and fabric spines, feeling the texture of each volume, hope waxing and waning with each empty shelf of clues. With each book I opened and found only text, frustration mounted, but my determination was unshakable. I couldn't fail my father, not now, not after that flicker of clarity. Hours passed and the night wore on. Exhaustion began to weigh on me, but adrenaline propelled me. Edgar, every now and then, flew to a different shelf, cawed, and returned to his perch, as if observing me, assessing my progress. I wondered if he was trying to guide me, or just expressing his own impatience. The mansion was silent, except for the rustling of pages and Edgar's occasional sound. Sophia's injunction, the legal battle, my father's health, everything condensed into the urgency of that search. I needed a victory, however small. Suddenly, Edgar flew to a shelf I had already searched, landing on a pile of old art books. He began to peck at the spine of a particularly thick volume, a dark green velvet-covered book, almost hidden behind others. I approached, skeptical, but something in his insistence made me stop. It was a book on botany, a subject my mother adored. I pulled it out, and it was heavier than it looked. The velvet cover was worn, but still held a certain charm. There was nothing special on the spine, no dedication on the first page. I leafed through it, expecting to find only illustrations of flowers and plants. But then, something caught my attention. Between pages 112 and 113, there was a small, almost imperceptible volume hidden. It wasn't a book, but a thin, old leather notebook with a rusted metal clasp. My heart pounded. It was a diary, My mother's diary. With trembling hands, I opened the clasp. The yellowed pages were filled with her elegant handwriting, but what made me hold my breath weren't the first entries about gardens and travels. In the middle of the diary, there was a series of pages that seemed to have been torn out and then carefully glued back in, with glue that had already dried and yellowed with time. They were old newspaper clippings, dated almost 20 years ago, and some handwritten letters. The clippings spoke of a minor financial scandal involving a shell company and a diversion of funds. Sophia's name wasn't explicitly there, but the description of one of those involved, an ambitious young woman with dubious connections, sent a chill down my spine. The letters, written by Sophia herself, were addressed to a person whose name was illegible, but the content was shocking. They revealed a plan to manipulate an elderly, wealthy man using his fragility to gain access to his fortune. The dates of the letters predated Sophia's marriage to my father. My mother had discovered something. She had kept these proofs, perhaps unaware of the extent of the danger they represented, or perhaps waiting for the right moment to reveal them. The tension in my chest transformed into a cold, controlled rage. That woman wasn't just an opportunist, she was a calculating predator, with a history of manipulation. My mother's diary wasn't just a link to the past, it was a ticking time bomb, irrefutable proof of Sophia's true nature. Edgar cawed again, this time with a tone that seemed satisfied. He knew. He had always known. I held the diary firmly, feeling the weight of the truth in my hands. This changed everything, the injunction, the accusations, the attempt to discredit my father. All of it could now be dismantled. But the discovery also brought a new layer of danger. Sophia would stop at nothing to protect her secrets. I had to be careful, cunning. The battle was far from over, but now I had a powerful weapon, a legacy from my mother, a gift from the past that could secure my father's future. The night, which promised to be long, now stretched into a dawn of possibilities and perhaps of justice. The night, which promised to be long, now stretched into a dawn of possibilities and perhaps of justice. My mother's diary in my hands was not just a book, but a portal to a dark past, a revelation that rewrote Sophia's entire history. I held it with the reverence of one unearthing a treasure, but also with the caution of one handling a ticking time bomb. The yellowed pages, the newspaper clippings, the letters with Sophia's unmistakable handwriting, everything screamed a truth I could barely process. She wasn't a recent opportunist. She was a predator with an established modus operandi, a web of lies and manipulations woven over years. Edgar, from atop his bookshelf, watched me with his intelligent eyes, as if sharing the weight of that discovery. He cawed again, a soft sound that somehow seemed like a confirmation, a silent, "I told you so." My mother, in her wisdom and discretion, had foreseen something, or perhaps merely documented her suspicions, without imagining the extent of the evil Sophia represented. She had kept these proofs, a legacy left for the right moment, for the son who would one day need them. The anger that consumed me was cold and calculating, different from the blind fury I had felt before. Now I had a clear target, a strategy that began to form in my mind. Sophia's injunction, her accusations, the attempt to discredit my father, all of it now seemed fragile before the overwhelming force of these proofs. But I knew the battle wouldn't be easy. Sophia wouldn't back down. She would fight tooth and nail to protect her secrets, her illicit fortune. Carefully, I closed the diary and put it in a safe in the library, a place only I knew. It wasn't safe to leave it exposed. The mansion, once a refuge, now seemed like a battlefield, and I needed to protect my weapons. Adrenaline kept me from feeling tired, The first light of dawn began to peek through the library windows, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange. I needed to act, and fast. I called Dr. Ribeiro as soon as the sun rose, not caring about the hour. His voice, initially sleepy, immediately became alert as I began to describe what I had found. "Dr. Ribeiro," I said, my voice firm, "we need to meet. Urgently. I have something that can turn the tables on Sophia." He agreed without hesitation, setting a meeting for late morning. The hours that followed were a torture of anticipation. I visited my father at the hospital, observing his gentle breathing, the fragility of his body. The image of Mother's book echoed in my mind, proof of his momentary lucidity, a link to the woman he loved and who, somehow, still protected him. "We're close, Father," I whispered, holding his hand. "Very close." When I finally met with Dr. Ribeiro and his team, the meeting room seemed charged with palpable expectation. I placed the diary on the table, opening it to the pages with the clippings and letters. The silence that followed was deafening. The lawyers leafed through the pages, their eyes scanning my mother's words, the proofs of Sophia's manipulation. This is explosive, Mr. Almeida," Dr. Ribeiro finally said, his voice low but charged with contained excitement. "It's not just a pattern of behavior, it's a confession of intent. The dates, the description. This links her directly to a history of fraud and manipulation. Their injunction, the attempt to discredit your father. All of it now falls apart. We can not only overturn the injunction, but also invalidate any document she may have forced your father to sign." Dr. Lucia, one of the younger lawyers on the team, pointed to one of the letters. "And the fact that she wrote this before she even met your father. That demonstrates premeditation. It wasn't a crime of opportunity, but a meticulous plan." The tension in the room transformed into determined focus. They began to outline a new strategy, to discuss the next steps. The idea was to use the diary not only as evidence, but as a tool to expose Sophia publicly, to dismantle her reputation and credibility. The legal battle, which once seemed an exhausting marathon, now had a visible finish line. However, the euphoria was short-lived. As soon as I left the law office, my phone rang. It was a call from an unknown number. I hesitated, but answered. The voice on the other end was cold and calculating, unmistakable. It was Sophia. "So the little bird found a new toy," she said, her voice laden with venom disguised as sweetness. "I hope you're not playing with things you don't understand, my dear. Certain secrets are best left buried." My blood ran cold. How did she know? Only I, Edgar, and the lawyers knew about the diary. She was watching me, or had informants everywhere. The tension reached a new peak. The discovery of the diary hadn't weakened her. It had only made her more dangerous, more desperate. "I don't know what you're talking about, Sophia," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm, but my heart pounded. She laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Don't play innocent. Elias was always a man of secrets. And your mother, well, she was even more so. But some secrets can burn those who touch them. Think carefully before you act, or the consequences could be irreversible. Not just for you, but for your dear father." The threat was clear, veiled, but undeniable. She was willing to do anything. The call ended abruptly, leaving me with a knot in my throat. The euphoria of the discovery was replaced by a wave of apprehension. I had a powerful weapon, yes, but Sophia was a ruthless adversary, and now she knew I had something. The battle wouldn't just be legal. It would be a war of nerves, a race against time to protect my father and expose the truth before Sophia could cause more harm. The night promised to be even longer than I imagined. Sophia's cold, calculating voice still echoed in my ears, a poison seeping into every cell of my body. "So the little bird found a new toy?" The question, laden with scorn, was not a doubt, but an affirmation. She knew. The fear I thought I had mastered returned with overwhelming force, mixed with icy rage. How? How could she know? Only I, Edgar, and the lawyers knew about the diary. The mansion, once the sanctuary of my childhood, now seemed a labyrinth of invisible eyes, each shadow a potential betrayer, each creak a whisper of surveillance. The phone in my hand felt like it was burning. The euphoria of the discovery, the feeling of having found the missing piece of the puzzle, was brutally crushed by the reality of the threat. Sophia wasn't just defending her position, she was counter-attacking, and she knew exactly where to strike. Don't play innocent. Elias was always a man of secrets, and your mother, well, she was even more so. But some secrets can burn those who touch them. Think carefully before you act, or the consequences could be irreversible, not just for you, but for your dear father. The last sentence, delivered with a macabre sweetness, was a direct hit on my most vulnerable point, my father. The call was abruptly cut off, leaving me alone with the echo of her words and the feeling of being cornered. Adrenaline pulsed through my veins, turning the air dense and heavy. I looked at the safe where I had put the diary. Was it secure, or did Sophia already have a plan to get it? Paranoia set in, a cold fog obscuring my reasoning. Did she have informants? Were there cameras or listening devices in the house? The idea of being constantly watched, of having every step monitored, was unbearable. Edgar, who had remained silent atop the bookshelf, let out a low caw, almost a lament. His black eyes fixed on me, and for an instant I had the impression that he understood the extent of the danger. He had guided me to the diary, my mother's secret weapon. Now, that weapon made me a target. I needed to act, and fast. The diary couldn't be the only proof. I needed copies, a contingency plan. But, more importantly, I needed to understand how Sophia knew. She wasn't bluffing. Her voice had the certainty of someone who holds control, or who is about to regain it. I returned to the safe, retrieved the diary, and examined it again. The yellowed pages, the newspaper clippings, the letters, everything there was the naked truth about Sophia. But there was something more. If she knew I had a new toy, it meant she was looking for it, or for something related to it. What exactly? The original proofs Edgar stole? The forced donation documents? Or perhaps something my mother might have hidden along with the diary? The threat to my father spurred me on. I couldn't allow Sophia to use him as a bargaining chip. My mind began to race, trying to connect the dots. The diary was Sophia's story, proof of her character. But the premise spoke of stolen glasses, original documents, medicine. Where were these items? The diary didn't speak directly of them, but perhaps it contained a clue, a method, an indication of my mother's modus operandi for hiding things. With steady hands, I took out my phone and photographed each page of the diary, ensuring that the handwriting and details of the clippings were perfectly visible. Then, I sent the images to an encrypted email to a secure server I used for important documents. It was a security measure in case anything happened to the original, but it still wasn't enough. I needed a place for the original, a place Sophia would never imagine, and I needed to think like my mother. She was discreet, intelligent. The diary was hidden in a botany book, a subject she loved. Where else would she hide something valuable, something that could protect my father? My eyes scanned the library, now under the faint light of dawn. Every book, every object seemed a potential hiding place, but Sophia knew I was searching. She knew I had something. This meant she would also be searching, or intensifying her search. Suddenly, a thought struck me. What if Sophia didn't know exactly what I had found, but only that I had found something that incriminated her? Her call could be an attempt to intimidate me, and at the same time to probe what I had. She was playing a dangerous game, and I needed to play better. The threat to my father, however, could not be ignored. I needed to see him to ensure he was safe, that Sophia hadn't done anything. I called the hospital again, asking to speak with the head nurse. She assured me that my father was stable, sleeping. A momentary relief, but the tension persisted. I looked at Edgar again. He was watching me, his head tilted. "Edgar," I whispered, "you helped me find the diary. You stole her glasses. You hid the original documents. Where are they? Where is Father's medicine?" The crow let out a stronger caw, a sound that seemed like frustration, or perhaps encouragement. He spread his wings and flew to the window, landing on the sill and looking out towards the garden. The garden. My mother loved the garden, and the diary was hidden in a book about botany. Could it be that she had hidden more things out there? Or that Edgar was trying to guide me to something in the garden? The idea seemed unlikely, but with Sophia watching me, what else did I have to lose? Edgar cawed again, a sharp sound that cut through the pre-dawn silence. He flapped his wings and flew from the window, not far, but to the bookshelf that led to the balcony door. He landed on an old volume, a gardening guide with a faded cover, and pecked at it vehemently. It was a book my mother consulted constantly, its pages filled with notes and drawings of rare flowers. That was not an obvious hiding place, not for someone unfamiliar with her habits. Sophia, with her superficiality, would never consider it. I approached, my heart pounding in my chest. The book was heavy, more than normal for its size. Carefully, I took it from the shelf. There was no secret compartment, but rather a skillful cutout in the core of the pages, forming a small box. Inside, wrapped in a silk scarf I recognized as my mother's, were the items I was looking for. First, a pair of thin-framed glasses, with a small scratch on the right lens, Sophia's glasses. Edgar had stolen them, exactly as the premise indicated. Her vision was terrible without them, which explained her fury and the need to get close to my father to force the signatures. Next, a stack of carefully folded papers, the original donation documents, the ones Sophia had forced my father to sign while he was confused. My father's trembling handwriting, the notary's seal, the dates. All there, untouched, irrefutable proof of fraud. The absence of these documents, the version Sophia would present, would be the tampered copy, or perhaps a new version she would try to create. But the originals were now in my hands, and they were the key to unmasking her. And finally, a small glass bottle with a pharmacy label, my father's medicine, the ones Sophia had hidden to keep him in a state of vulnerability, to manipulate him. The expiration date, the dosage, everything was there. Proof that she had deliberately deprived my father of his essential medication. A shiver ran down my spine. It wasn't just the diary. It was the diary, the glasses, the documents, and the medicine. A complete web of evidence, each piece fitting perfectly to form a devastating picture of Sophia's cruelty and premeditation. My mother, even after her death, had orchestrated everything to protect my father. She had foreseen the threat, or at least had prepared for it. Edgar cawed again, a sound of satisfaction. He had fulfilled his part, guiding me through the labyrinth of secrets. My mother had trusted him, and he had not disappointed her, but the discovery, though liberating, came with an even greater weight. Sophia knew I had a new toy. She didn't know what, but she knew something had been found. Now, with all the pieces of the puzzle in my hands, I became an even more dangerous target. She would not hesitate to use every means to recover these documents, to silence me. The threat to my father, the macabre sweetness in her voice, now made terrible sense. She was desperate, and a desperate person is the most dangerous of all. I couldn't simply hand this over to the lawyers and wait. I needed a plan to protect these proofs, and to protect my father. I looked at the dawn beginning to tint the sky with rosy hues. The legal battle had transformed into a war of nerves, a race against time. I had the weapons, but Sophia had cunning and a lack of scruples. I needed to be faster, smarter. My father's life and my mother's memory depended on it. The game had changed, and now I was playing to win. Breath held, heart hammering against my ribs. The evidence was there, in my hands, each piece a death blow to Sophia's facade. The glasses, the original documents, the medicine bottle. My mother's diary, already copied and secured, was the preface. These were the final chapters, irrefutable and devastating. Edgar, high on the bookshelf, let out a soft caw, almost a sigh of relief, as if the burden he carried had finally been transferred. He had fulfilled his mission, a winged guardian of truth. But the victory was fragile. Sophia knew I had something. Her voice on the call echoed in my mind, the macabre sweetness of her threat to my father. She wasn't bluffing. She was a wounded predator, and wounded predators are the most dangerous. I couldn't afford to hesitate. My first priority was the security of the evidence. The original donation documents, with my father's trembling handwriting, were the centerpiece. They proved coercion. Sophia's glasses, with the characteristic scratch, were proof of her desperation and Edgar's intervention. And the medicine. The medicine. The cruelest proof of her premeditation and negligence. With firm but hurried hands, I took out my phone again. I photographed every detail of the documents, the glasses, the medicine bottle, every angle, every mark. Then I sent these images to the same encrypted email, to the secure server. It wasn't enough. I needed a plan that didn't rely solely on digital files. I thought of my mother. She had hidden the diary in a botany book, the other items in a gardening guide, places Sophia, with her superficiality, would never look. I needed an even safer hiding place for the physical originals, one that could only be accessed at the right moment. My eyes swept across the office, now bathed in the pale light of dawn. The answer came from an unexpected place, my father's cigar box, a dark, carved wooden box he kept in a locked desk drawer. He hadn't smoked for years, but he kept it as a memento of my grandfather. Sophia would never be interested in it, and the drawer, I knew, had an old lock whose secret only my father and I knew. It was a place of memories, not of material value to her. With the key my father had given me years ago, I opened the drawer. The cigar box was there, untouched. I placed the glasses, the documents, and the medicine bottle inside it, wrapped in my mother's silk scarf. I closed the box, locked the drawer, and put away the key. It was a temporary hiding place, but secure enough for the next step. The next step, my father. I called the hospital again. The head nurse, who already knew me, answered, "He's fine, sir, sleeping soundly. The medication is taking effect." Medication, the one Sophia had hidden. Rage boiled in my chest, but I contained it. "Please don't leave him alone for a minute. If Sophia shows up, don't let her into the room. Tell her it's my order and that I'm on my way." The nurse, sensing the urgency in my voice, promised to comply. I needed a lawyer, and I needed one who was as cunning as Sophia, not one who would be intimidated by her threats or influence. I thought of Dr. Almeida, an old friend of my father's, known for his integrity and his ferocity in court. He had retired, but I knew he would make an exception for my father. I called Dr. Almeida, explaining the situation in general terms, but with the necessary urgency. He listened in silence, his voice grave when he finally responded. "Come to my office immediately, my dear. Bring everything you have. This is a serious situation. But if you have what you say you have, Sophia is in serious trouble." As I prepared to leave, Edgar flew from the bookshelf and landed on my shoulder. He gently pecked my ear, a gesture of farewell or encouragement. "Thank you, my friend," I whispered, stroking his head. "You were the best ally I could have had." He cawed in response before flying to the window. observing the world outside with his intelligent eyes. The sun was already high when I left home, my mother's diary in a secure folder, the drawer key in my pocket. I felt the weight of responsibility, but also a new strength. The uncertainty had dissipated, replaced by a clarity of purpose. Sophia had underestimated all of us, my mother's intelligence, Edgar's loyalty, and above all, a son's love for his father. On the way to Dr. Almeida's office, my phone rang. It was Sophia. I hesitated for an instant but decided to answer. "You have my new toy, don't you?" Her voice sounded colder and more calculating than before. "I know you do, and I know what you're trying to do." "You don't know anything, Sophia," I replied, my voice firm without a trace of fear. "But you will know, and when you do, it will be too late." There was a silence on the other end of the line, a silence charged with contained fury. "Don't you dare challenge me. Your father, he is so fragile, so dependent. Think of the consequences before acting imprudently." "The consequences will be for you, Sophia," I said, feeling the adrenaline pulsing, "and they will be irreversible. Prepare yourself. The game is over." I hung up before she could respond, feeling immense relief. I was no longer cornered. I had the weapons, I had the plan, and I had the truth. At Dr. Almeida's office, the story unfolded. He examined the photos, read the diary, listened to every detail of my narrative. His eyes, once tired, gleamed with renewed determination. "This is more than enough," he declared, slapping his hand on the table. "We have an irrefutable case of fraud, coercion, and criminal negligence. Sophia has nowhere to run." The plan was quickly drawn. First, a court order to protect my father, preventing any contact from Sophia. Next, a formal complaint to the police and the public prosecutor's office, presenting all digital evidence and the location of the physical originals, which would be handed over into judicial custody. The media, whose image Sophia so highly valued, would be the stage for her downfall. Days later, the news broke. The story of Sophia, the exemplary daughter-in-law, crumbled under the weight of the evidence. The original donation documents, the stolen glasses, the hidden medicine, my mother's diary. Everything came to light. Sophia's carefully constructed image shattered into pieces before the public's eyes. She tried to deny, tried to counter-attack, but there was no way. The evidence was overwhelming. My father's handwriting, the date of the documents, the forensic analysis of the medicine that confirmed the deprivation. The story of Edgar, the crow who had been the faithful guardian of truth, became a fascinating detail that the media adored. My father, recovered and with his medication up to date, testified. His voice, once trembling and confused, was now clear and firm, telling the story of his manipulation. He remembered the confusion, the pressure, the blurred figure of Sophia forcing him to sign. Sophia was arrested, charged with fraud, coercion, and attempted murder by negligence. The empire she tried to build on my father's fragility collapsed, taking with it her reputation and her freedom. Months passed. My father recovered completely, his mind and spirit restored. He returned home, to the garden my mother so loved, and to the company of Edgar, who continued to be his faithful companion. The house, once a stage for intrigue, was now a sanctuary of peace and memories. My mother's diary was kept, not as a weapon, but as a testament to her love and wisdom. Edgar, the crow, continued to live with us, a constant reminder that truth, however hidden, always finds a way to come to light, often guided by the most unlikely of heroes. Justice had been done, and my mother's memory and my father's dignity were finally restored. The game was over, and truth, as always, won.